Senate Bill 1367.
Senate Bill 1367, an act amending Title 26, Chapter 1, Article 3, Arizona statutes by adding Section 26-164 relating to the National Guard.
You've heard the third reading of Senate Bill 1367. Those in favor of the measure vote aye. Those opposed vote no. System is now open. The Senate will now proceed to vote. Senators Shamp, Mendez, and Carroll, how do you vote? Senator Watsack.
Mr. President Pro Tem, may I rise to explain my vote?
Please.
I rise in support of SB 1367. As a committed supporter of America's veterans and as a legislator who took the oath to uphold and protect the United States Constitution, I will be enthusiastically voting for this legislation. But behind closed doors, I've heard whispers and threats made about this bill, its opponents' claims that if the National Guard does not make itself available to fight for unconstitutional wars, then the Pentagon will defend our Guard. The idea that the federal government would rather abandon a state with no auxiliary or reserve force other than to hold a vote for our military goes to war should be a signal that something about the health of our political system. But I believe that this challenge is a paper tiger. Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona Republican District 9 has endorsed SB 1367, and he has tried to dispel the fear-mongering over this National Guard funding, and I'll read from an op-ed that he authored last month. Some opponents contend to the passage of this bill and it would potentially threaten the Arizona National Guard's federal funding, but this is incorrect. There is nothing in federal law that would eliminate federal funding if Arizona passes the National Guard Act. Nor would Congress pass such legislation. The federal government needs a well-prepared Guard. I pledge that under no circumstances will I allow Biden administration to defund our state's National Guard. I know that the House of Representatives would not approve such dereliction of nonsense, and the House controls the purse strings. A free people should not allow themselves to be threatened with their own tax dollars, especially when the submission of this compromises both the safety of our soldiers and the rule of law. I encourage everyone to read Representative Gosar's full op-ed on the Libertarian Institute. This truth is no member of Congress, Pentagon official, or senior military official has publicly stated that it would defund Arizona's National Guard, and I do not believe that this body would be bullied into any unsigned threats. If opponents of this bill believe that the National Guard's funding is threatened, then they should name the names so that we can say who's making those threats, because the answer is that none of the people who wrote and write this federal budget have done so, and so I'm voting yes for SB 1367.
Senator Watsack votes aye. Senator Sundaration.
Thank you, Mr. President Pro Tem. I rise to explain my vote.
Please.
I offer a contrary perspective. This bill would indeed result in the U.S. Army and Air Force revoking federal recognition of the Arizona National Guard because our Guard members and units would be considered non-deployable. I don't think that's a threat, as was intimated from the prior vote explanation, but simply an interpretation of how the system works. This loss of federal recognition would result in the loss of federal funding of the Arizona National Guard, which last year amounted to $574 million, compared to the state's match contribution of $4.4 million. There are a number of concerns so that was a cost concern that I just spoke to. There's also a U.S. constitutional perspective that the loss of federal recognition of the Arizona National Guard and transferring of those units and equipment to the federal components might actually lead to consolidation of our nation's combat forces under the federal government and weaken the state balance and the state role in national defense. And this bill is also unconstitutional from an Arizona Constitution perspective because Article 16, Section 3 of the Arizona Constitution requires that the organization, equipment, and discipline of the National Guard shall conform as nearly as shall be practicable to the regulations for the government of the armies of the United States, which requires the ability to deploy in response to a federal call-up, and this bill seeks to do the opposite. And so there are also safety considerations as well from removing funding from these units, as well as the immediate effect on missions at both of our Arizona Air National Guard wings in Phoenix and Tucson, as well as soldiers who are currently on routine deployments to areas designated as combat zones, as well as the upcoming routine deployment of approximately 700 soldiers over the course of the year. And so given these numerous concerns and constitutional issues, I vote no.
Senator Sundaration votes no. Senator Rogers. Mr. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to explain my vote.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Guard is established to ensure that we basically spread the gunpowder from the regular forces to the reserve forces and our National Guard and especially the State Guard to handle things domestically. To deploy our troops into hostile combat zones where war has not been declared is something that the regular forces have to deal with. Our reserve components and National Guard should not have to deal with that. So I'm just going to quote somebody who is very famous in our ranks of the Corps. He says, "War is a racket. It is possibly the oldest, easily most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one in international scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to be to the majority of the people, but only a few inside groups knows what it's really about. It is conducted for the benefit of very few at the expense of very many. Out of war, a few people make huge profits. Out of war, a few make the huge profits." Major General Smedley D. Butler, 1935, U.S. Marine Corps, two-time Medal of Honor recipient. When we activated our troops to go to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, to be in the reserve behind the active components, the same thing with Iraqi Freedom 1 and 2. Unfortunately, they were deployed so quickly they did not have the proper training. These are civilian warriors, weekend warriors, if they always call them. They're cooks, bakers, candlestick makers. They're the cop on the street, the firemen. They're nurses. All walks of life. I served 22 years, and I'm proud to say that I served amongst a lot of good heroes. But they were deployed unequipped, ill-trained, and our history has proven that. Going all the way back to even the Korean War, and even Southeast Asia, and the last two Gulf Wars. I vote aye.
Majority Leader votes aye. Senator Rogers.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I rise to explain my vote.
Please.
I am the proud sponsor of this bill, Defend the Guard, which is moving through several states other than Arizona as I speak. As a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, lifetime member of the VFW, and lifetime member of the American Legion, I read this to you. Last week, American Legion National Commander Vincent Troiola said, "Our nation's founders made clear that declaration of war is the solemn and sole responsibility of the United States Congress. A strong national defense is an original pillar of the American Legion. Forever war is not." The American Legion calls on Congress, the United States Congress, to once again follow the text of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the United States Constitution. The American Legion made that statement in response to attempted congressional action about the war in Syria. This is a war that Congress never voted for or declared, but where National Guard units are continually being deployed. My bill, Senate Bill 1367, seeks to remedy this situation and others by prohibiting the deployment of the Arizona National Guard into active combat without a declaration of war from the United States Congress. This prerequisite is already the supreme law of the land according to Article 1, Section 8. But it's a law that's been continually disregarded and violated by presidents of both parties. SB 1367 does not undermine federal law. It reinforces federal law. If the president wants to use the Arizona National Guard to fight wars halfway across the world, then it can only be done after a majority of the people's representatives vote to send them there. If Congress refuses to vote, then it's a war the Arizona National Guard should not be fighting. My bill would not prevent the Arizona National Guard from participating in lawful domestic missions, including disaster relief, or prevent their participation in overseas training missions that are not related to active combat operations. What it would do is force the United States Congress to put their names on the dotted line before our soldiers put their boots on the ground. One of America's, again, similar named leader, as my colleague said, Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler, who was awarded the Medal of Honor twice, said, "We Americans who will protect our flag should have a voice in where it is flown." The American Legion is the largest veterans group in the United States. They say it's time to end these endless wars in the Middle East and Africa and rein in unconstitutional executive overreach. As a 20-year retiree of the United States Air Force, I am proud to carry this legislation and encourage all members to vote in favor. And with that, I vote aye.
Senator Rogers votes aye. System is now closed. Secretary record a vote. By your vote of 16 ayes, 13 nays, 1 not voting, you've passed Senate Bill 1367. Sign in open session. Secretary is instructed to record the action, transmit the bill to the House. Senate Bill